Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Jackson. I'm the director of the Arts Research Center, and it's such a privilege and pleasure to welcome you here today. This gathering, as many of you know, continues conversations that we had seeded in other types of gatherings around our Art Plus neighborhood focus group, specifically one that was directed more toward the city of Berkeley, another recently toward the mid-market neighborhood, as well as others that took advantage of visiting artist residencies and public art projects. Today, those efforts have been expanded to a wider Bay Area, fortified by the challenge and generosity of the Mellon-funded Global Urban Humanities Initiative here at Berkeley, a project that brings together faculty and students from the arts and humanities with those of the School of Environmental Design. So as part of the Global Urban Humanities Initiative, this symposium was conceived in connection to a course taught by myself and by my colleague in City and Regional Planning, Teresa Caldera, where we're exploring local and international conjunctions around the arts and public space. But this symposium could not be possible without the help of several students who are in the course, and may I ask you all to raise your hand, our student volunteers, as well as undergraduate interns in environmental design and community arts who are helping us today. It also would not have been possible without the incredible stewardship of GUH staff, especially Susan Moffett, there in the corner, and Irene Chen, who is running around. And also without the incredible stewardship of Sarah Gibbons from the Arts Research Center here. And I also wanted to note that without the can-do attitude of Lauren Pearson, our new Associate Director of ARC, whose first day is today. Trial by fire. She'll be running back to Columbia. No, I think she's as excited as I am to see the kind of response we've had to these questions. Today, we hope to think together about a range of questions that I know brought many of you here today. If creativity has been touted as a key motor in the vitalization of contemporary cities, what kinds of creativity are valued, expressed by whom, for what purpose, in what places? If the creative class discourse has been largely, I would say, some would say discredited in some academic settings, such as ours at Berkeley, what do we, just saying. What do we do with the fact that it is still very much in circulation in so many cities throughout the world? Furthermore, where are the arts in the creativity question or in the urban vitalization question? Where are the arts in this kind of equation, and how many equations do we need? How many different kinds of values do artists bring to bear on city projects? Are they acts of beauty, acts of community, acts of criticality, acts of economic enterprise? How do these and other values resonate with each other but also contradict each other? And how do they resonate or contradict with the values promoted by a variety of civic constituencies? Moreover, to continue a preoccupation that's always of concern to me in my own writing and teaching, how does this conjunction change what it means to make art? How are artists conceiving social and material experience, not simply as the setting or as the byproduct of an art event, but as fundamental to its core? What does it mean to make art from, not simply about, digital connection? What does it mean to situate a social justice project inside an art event? That is, not only as theme, but as form. What does it mean to position the so-called natural environment in the foreground, rather than in the background of public art experience? And how does this positioning unsettle divisions that we might draw between the urban and the natural along the way? It has to be said, of course, that underlying all of these questions are urgent questions around economics, policy, and partnership. Is urban vitalization an exponential process or a zero-sum game? How are all of you collaborating across economic sectors, social welfare sectors, and cultural sectors? What frame or project or emergency has allowed or might still allow different sectors to see each other as the solution rather than as the obstacle to solving each other's problems? And for us at UC Berkeley, what does it mean for us to be part of that reimagining, even as we reimagine ourselves? That is, to be part of this type of conversation, not only as a think tank for the arts, as ARC likes to call ourselves, or not only as a 3-year research project with GUH, but as entities housed within a system of public higher education, one that seeks to maintain its public values even as public funding recedes. So we're looking forward to a great day, a bracing day, to a day of provocation around the reimagining of the urban. Please know that we have ways of circulating any propaganda you have brought about your own institutions or opportunities you have for each other and for our students. Also, I invite you to check page 3 of your program to make sure you see all the communications data, various hashtags, as well as ways of getting online, if need be. And I also wanted to note that the plenary speakers are strategically positioned at different parts of the room to be sure that everyone feels part of a conversation, but also to tell you that the attendees in this room are as distinguished as our speakers. Some of them have spoken for us before and will be on the dais next time. So I invite you to introduce yourselves to each other at breaks and throughout the lunch and make use of each other. At your table, you'll also find paper and markers where we have, because remember we're a university, we have 2 assignments for you. One is to see if you might help us with continuing our keyword project. I hope some of you had a chance to check blog postings on keywords of relevance and debated terms in the urban arts landscape. And I'd like you to take notes. We'd love to have you take notes about words that come up for you throughout the day that you think are important or debatable or annoying or need further clarification or might be a real springboard for rethinking. And then the second thing is to take notes, if you can, about how our plenary topics are of relevance or not relevance to your organizations, or of relevance only with certain modifications. Share information about it, take notes yourselves, but we're very aware that today is a day for all of you to refresh, to have our speakers work hard for you, and to take in new information and to reimagine, but we also want to hear from you throughout the day. So this is our little moment to make sure that that we do. We look forward to reimagining together and to hearing from all of you from all different sectors about what reimagining might be. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome the first panel, which will be chaired by Margaret Crawford, who is a professor in the School of Architecture and one of the key collaborators in the Global Urban Humanities Project. Margaret is known for a variety of works, in particular Building the Workman's Paradise on workers' movements and housing, progressive housing at the turn of the century and throughout the 20th, The Car and the City, in part thinking about the reformation and reimagining of Los Angeles with cars and cities, and is really, I think, most known for her concept of everyday urbanism, a kind of touchstone that has been key in her teaching, in so many different strains of her scholarship, and in so many different studio processes and public engagement processes that engage the city. So it is a true privilege to have welcome Margaret to the dais.
Thank you, Shannon. Can everyone hear me? And thank you for organizing such an interesting day. Now, I'm sure that everyone here knows that San Francisco is undergoing a development renaissance, right? All of us have seen the enormous numbers of construction cranes all over the city. And so the question we really want to ask today is the city's economic success putting the arts in peril, especially the community-based art organizations and artists? I read in the paper, as I'm sure many of you did, that San Francisco as a city gives the largest amount of money to the arts of any city in the United States. But is that enough to offset what others really see as a series of processes linked to development that are really challenging the city of San Francisco right now? These are dynamics that may seem unrelated. They may seem at odds with each other, but I want to just mention one of them. One of them, of course, is gentrification. I'm sure many of you have seen the recent letter from Guillermo Gomez Peña, who is really protesting the eviction of some of the key artists, Yolanda Lopez and Rene Yanez, who were founders of the Galeria de la Raza, a really important community organization in terms of the arts in San Francisco, who were being evicted. Gomez Peña also says that more than 10,000 artists have left the city, moving to Oakland and points beyond. So he links this process not just really to domestic evictions, but to larger movements of real estate capital that are transforming the city. And so that's another narrative that comes here that many people, such as Rebecca Solnit, would also identify as a significant narrative. And what that is the narrative we're going to examine in this morning's first session. What is the role of artists, arts organizations, in the development plans of San Francisco? And so what we're going to do is actually, how do we help? We're going to zero in and look at a very small part of the city, which is ground zero, really, for these development projects. And this, of course, is the area around the Mid-Market Street area, and all of our speakers today are really physically located in this particular part of the city, which has been the arena for a lot of discussion. The first speaker is Andy Wang, who is a development associate at Forest City Enterprises. Forest City Enterprises is the Northern California branch of the National Development Company, Forest City. They are best known for, the Eastern branch is best known for their very, very controversial project in the Atlantic Yards in Brooklyn, which produced the Barclays Center Sports Arena, but the ambition of the plan is very contested, and the project is on hold. Andy has a background in journalism and city planning, and he's been with the project for a year. Now, you can see the 5M project there. It is I guess I'd call it a mega development. It is a 4-acre mixed-use development project on Mission at 5th. The person who will be collaborating with him is Deborah Cullinan, who is currently the executive director of the Yerba Buena Arts Center. I'll talk about it later, which was the product of another era of urban redevelopment. But her role here is really connected with her former position as the director of the Intersection for the Arts. Intersection for the Arts is an organization that combines art with grassroots community development. It was located actually about 2 blocks down Mission Street from the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. And in this role, she began a collaboration with the 5M project. The project is called 5M Placeworks, and we're going to hear all about it today. The third speaker is Elvin Padilla, who is a community development arts practitioner. He's consulted for many nonprofits and most recently headed the Tenderloin Economic Development Project. And he's now the director of the 950 Center for Arts and Education, which is a proposal to transform a group of rundown buildings on Market Street into a center that will be based in these community groups that deal with art and education. So I'm looking forward to finding out in much more detail exactly how these unexpected and perhaps unlikely collaborations between community arts and real estate development are going to work. So thank you.
Is that our first slide?
No.
Big shout out for Intersection for the Arts. Right? Again, my name is Deborah Cullinan. I am currently the brand new executive director at Yerba Buena Center for the Arts. And as Margaret mentioned, I think the Yerba Buena Gardens project is an extraordinary project. And at some point, this room full of people should explore it. Many of you may know that when the state of California decided to do away with redevelopment, all of the redevelopment assets in the state of California now are having to be reconsidered. And the Yerba Buena Gardens project is probably, I believe, to be the largest and certainly the most complex project in the state. And if any of you have been down to the gardens today, despite its, I think, quite controversial history, it's a pretty extraordinary example of synergy, of what it means to put together different kinds of uses and to center art, culture, and creativity really at the core of a project as a way to help sort of create a boundaryless place. A lot of people refer to the Yerba Buena Gardens as Dolores Park downtown, which I think is a good thing. Do we agree? It's not a bad thing, or it could be kind of a bad thing. But anyway, but I'm here today to, and I believe that is what we're talking about, right? Like these are tough conversations. Andy and I have had less of an opportunity to talk about the 5M project together in public than I have had with some of his colleagues, Alexa Arena and Alex Michel, who are the folks that were sort of around from the beginning. These are really difficult conversations, and we hope that you know that we are not afraid of the difficult questions, and that at the heart of those questions is where we can find solutions and different approaches. So we're here to talk about the 5M project. What I want to say really quickly is that this project, this story for Intersection for the Arts started years ago. I can't count the years at this point, but what it was Intersection nearly at that point, probably, I don't know, heading towards 42, 43 years old, was really struggling like many organizations of its kind. Really powerful program, very renowned, filling the theater, filling the gallery space that we had on Valencia Street, but really struggling in terms of the nonprofit model. And our building was really conflicted. Lots of problems with the building, struggle kind of convincing the landlord to provide us with a long-term lease, lots of that sort of stuff. We did a strategic plan, and this is before the economy really revealed itself. And that plan, we decided that we wanted to address the facility issue, but we also talked a lot about the nonprofit model. And we were sort of like, what does it mean to actually be encouraging all of the artists that we support in our fiscal sponsorship program to sort of head towards the same pool of diminishing resources that we're heading towards, and to sort of pursue this model that I think is maybe less successful in really creating sustainable, creative lives for the artists that we work with. So we were talking about things like entrepreneurship and enterprise development, and like we did not know what we were talking about, but we were using these words. So that's important. We start to look for buildings, and the economy starts to sort of seep out. We're starting to feel like, okay, this is going to get a little bit scary. We found what we thought was the perfect building, and at the time, the perfect building for an organization like Intersection was one that we could own. We thought for sure if we owned it, we'd be all better. If we had a bigger theater, we'd be better. And if we had a gallery on the ground floor, shit would be great, right? So we really thought that that was the solution to all these problems that we had. Found that building, thought it was perfect, right? It was the perfect building. We found out we were in competition for it, and it turned out to be the founders of the Hub Bay Area, now known as Hub Impact. We sat down, and we were going to compete, and the story is true because I was there. Literally 5 minutes into it, we said, what? Like, wouldn't the world be a better place if artists and social entrepreneurs were collaborating? Wouldn't it be awesome if art was integrated wholly into this global movement for social change, and we understood the role that artists play in any conversation about innovation? And wouldn't it be awesome if artists could learn more entrepreneurial models? So that started this whole process. Then we look for buildings. This goes on for like years. I'm really like, I learned only by failure, only. Every building we got under contract, we lost. The market was erratic. It was crazy. Block by block, stores were shuttering. People were losing their housing. You remember this time. The whole city was changing so rapidly. Intersection starts looking around, and we start thinking that maybe what the world needs is not yet another theater or yet another gallery space, but what it needs is art at the core of a new approach to community development. So we were really putting together, there's sort of mini, compared to our project with Forest City, these sort of mini 5M projects. We were playing with partners cross-sector and really looking sort of at the needs and the things that were happening in the communities around us. And what I learned from that is that, like, literally block by block, it's different. You need different partnerships. You have to have different approaches. You have to really be thinking about what's immediate to that neighborhood. Lost the last building. The very next day, and I'm not kidding, I got a call from Alexa Arena, who heads up Andy's office here, and she was describing the 5M project, which we're now going to tell you about, I promise. It was uncanny to me what she was talking about. She was talking about creating a whole new approach to how we develop our urban cores and what happens when we create synergistic places where creative people can be together and spark off of each other. And isn't that where the most breakthrough ideas come from? And so we started talking, and it was before we named it the 5M Project, but they had a scale that Intersection for the Arts simply doesn't have, which was interesting to us. What does it mean if we can do something that's big enough that it can be replicated and learned from and replicated? And they were very committed and remain committed not to art as early stage intervention in neighborhoods that are considered blighted or vacant, but to art as a central and sustained component of any thriving place in any city. And that was interesting enough to us to take the risk. So we're gonna tell you now. Do you wanna help me? That was my backstory. So I'll let Andy tell you a little bit about the project. You wanna?
Sure. So there's going to be a lot of vision here, but I think Deborah is alluding to kind of a series of happy accidents that 5M is, and we'll take credit for those accidents. But I think a lot of what came out of 5M is sort of the economy crashing and like a series of spaces opening up, and just us taking advantage of them to kind of prototype our ideas about how we can merge arts and entrepreneurship. So the 5M project is really about 4 acres at 5th and Mission Streets. They're owned by Hearst Corporation, and which also owns the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Chronicle building right here. So the 5M project includes this building, and it includes kind of the 50%, which is surface parking lots next to that. So what this project initially was about creating this development that was about connecting kind of the economy of the future, the innovation economy, tech companies that are flooding into Soma, and kind of connecting that to the community, which was saying at that time, we want a better plug, a better bridge into this new economy because we see a lot of money flowing in. We don't really have a way of plugging into this. So the concept then was using this platform of arts entrepreneurship making, which is kind of this new world of the maker movement, which we'll go into a little bit, food, a whole spectrum of basically kind of entrepreneurial and arts-based activities to build a new kind of place that everyone could feel ownership of. So we had this great concept, and then the economy crashed, so we were like, well, let's hold on for a little bit, right? But at the same time, the San Francisco Chronicle building was opening up a little bit because the San Francisco Chronicle, as we all know, was shrinking. So they opened up a lot of space, and so that's sort of where Intersection and the Hub come in. So just to go quickly into a bit of physical principles, you'll see we opened up this site with a lot of alleys, and so Soma is actually built up with a lot of these alleyways permeating each of its kind of mega blocks. One of the early principles that we baked into this project was we wanted to keep these alleys as literally and kind of figuratively a circulation system, because if you think of this as a kind of organic being where a lot of people are connecting, you literally need a way for them to connect without just paving over these alleys. And then this is kind of the central heart of the project, which is what we think of as a cultural heart of 5M. You're going to have a lot of tech people, you're going to have a lot of arts people, food people, maker people. So where do they all come together that feels organically like a place that people can take ownership of? And, you know, it's like the city, it's like the street, it's public, it's open. So just a quick snapshot of the 5M concept. We've got a whole spectrum of different uses, right? We've got making, and so that's typified by Tech Shop, which is this, they call themselves the 24-hour fitness of machines. So you buy yourself a membership to Tech Shop, and instead of running on a treadmill twice a week, you get access basically to laser etchers, to woodworking machinery, sewing machines, AutoCAD, anything you can think of. And probably almost a quarter of the membership at Tech Shop is running some sort of entrepreneurial pursuit. So it ranges from hobbies, people who are just making kind of their own arts projects, to people who are really starting to get their own businesses off the ground. And occasionally I hear they have Kickstarter campaigns where they pop a champagne bottle and they say, hey, we're on Kickstarter, everybody throw in $1 or $2. We've got the Hub, which Deborah talked about, a social entrepreneurship community, and there's actually 2 floors above us, I think, which is the smaller Berkeley outpost. We've got Intersection for the Arts, which Deborah used to head up, a 50 or 50-year-old arts organization. SF Made, which is a nonprofit that's actually based out of Tech Shop, and what they do is encourage and support people who are trying to do manufacturing within the city of San Francisco. We've got Square, which is a large kind of an anchor tenant, if you will. If you're familiar with them, they are responsible for those little white dongles that help you pay with your credit card at little vendors. And they are actually moving out, I believe, this month, and Yahoo is moving in next month. So there's a lot going on there. We've got SF Digital Film School, which is basically a school for digital arts. And then we've got Off the Grid, twice a week, mobile food truck event. So it's a whole range of different kinds of activities that kind of opens the door for lots of different people and different interests to plug in. And then we've got a whole range of different physical environments as well to house all those different uses. So maybe you can speak to some of these.
Yeah. And I think the key to what Andy just, among the things that I think are key to kind of how this is working right now is Andy just described to you what I think we affectionately call phase 0. So the development project will go in phases, right? Over time, this will take years. And just to be clear, it is a 4-acre project. Margaret used the word mega. I think it's something like 1.7 million square feet eventually, and it's mixed use. Some of the principles that we didn't talk about that I think are just of interest are density, designing for density, and 24/7 use, and thinking instead of things like financial districts where people roll in at a certain time and then everything gets quiet, and then people roll out and then everything gets quiet. They're looking really at creating something like a social district where there's constant interaction and creativity and more opportunity for the folks that may be moving in to interact with the people that have been there. But phase 0, I think, is a really essential phase. This is about experimentation. This is about taking space that is vacant and empty and activating it. And it's not the developer just turning it over to someone to tenant. It's literally curated tenanting. So Forest City handpicked the organizations that are occupying all of the space in order to create a test tube and experiment, a picture of what it could look like, and in order to use the way in which we're using or activating the space to help inform the long-term design. So I think that's a really important part of the experiment, and you'll see that they're also doing that as much as they can with their Pier 70 project. So just a couple of little examples of what we're doing. This is Intersections gallery space, and this is shared space that is located directly between Intersection and the Hub. One of the nice parts of this story is that when we initially decided, hey, we're going to do this, let's take this risk, let's get into this 5M project and see what it is. Intersections board and community were a little confused. And so the hub said, leadership of the hub said, hey, why don't we'll go in, we'll lease space, we'll create a program space for you, we'll pay for it, and you can activate it. The goal, the advantage to the hub is that it's attractive to their membership. It supports their business model. It makes it a unique space. It drives membership. And then for us, the attraction was what happens when you place a gallery space. And most of our alternative and nonprofit gallery spaces, as you know, are places that we know, right? We know to go to them. The people who are coming to them are often people who you know by name. We're circulating artists, we're moving around, but we're not necessarily placing the work in settings that are surprising, in places where a lot of the people who are coming in do not care, or they think they don't care. So it creates an opportunity for us to make them care. And I was just on a panel with a Colombian director, Manuel, I can't think of his last name right now, and he said, surprise them, make them addicts. And I think that's a really good, surprise them and make them addicts. Put work and energy in places where people may be surprised by it, where we can turn them on. And so this was an exciting experiment for us. This gallery now has had, I can't count the number of shows, and the result of it is this really interesting cross-section of people who are gathering together around important contemporary ideas. And then Andy referred to our partnership with Off the Grid. This is another good example of how to use experimentation. So this is in the tunnel, you can't totally tell, between the San Francisco Chronicle building and the old Examiner building. And what I learned all this stuff from Forest City, but what I learned is that cities don't like tunnels because tunnels are dark places where supposedly bad things happen. And yet these arts people look at the tunnel and they're like, that's cool. Like we can make that into a theater, we can make that into a gathering place. And it's situated really pretty, I think it's a pretty important thing. It's situated literally between 5th and Mission and the 6th Street corridor, right? And if y'all know San Francisco, if you turn right when you walk out of the 5M project, you're at the Westfield Mall, which is about the fanciest shopping center we can imagine. And if you turn left, you're on the 6th Street corridor. And so how do you create this opportunity for people to interact and draw them from different sides? And you know, we all know that if we are not gathering together across boundaries, if we are not seeing each other and the challenges that we face as our own, we're not going to solve them. We're just going to further isolate them. So taking a space like this and activating it by putting food trucks in it and putting music in it and trying to draw people from different parts and different sides of the project was really important. It's also an opportunity for us to say to Forest City, look at how cool it is. Can't we keep it or keep something like it, or try to think about how you create these spaces in the long term? Right. This was a collaboration led by Gray Area Foundation for the Arts, Urban Prototyping Festival, an intersection, and you see we had a collection of partnerships. So this was an urban prototyping festival. We looked at the 5M site and we said, here are some challenges. What do you do with a chain link fence? What do you do with stop signs that don't necessarily stop cars? What do you do with people who really need to use a restroom and there just isn't one for them anywhere? What are some solutions for this? We did hackathons, we did open calls, we gathered up 25 of the best projects. We laid them down in a festival that took place over a Saturday. And 5,000 people came. And I think we were amazed by the energy around it, and we were also amazed by how challenging it was to have this kind of festival in that part of the city, and in what ways were we successful or not successful in drawing the people who are indigenous to that neighborhood. And I think that we were less successful than we wanted to be. And then do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. Deborah and I mixed our slides up a little bit, and I thought I'd throw this one in there just to speak a little bit to this platform of economic opportunity that has sort of grown up over the last 2 to 3 years at 5M. So we certainly won't say that we're experts at this as the real estate developers, but this is something that Tech Shop has definitely cultivated within their own community as their kind of membership-based, 24-hour fitness for machines. And this was just this incredible story that came out probably 2 or 3 months ago about this man named Mark Roth, who was, for a couple reasons, I think, homeless for a while, but he found the Tech Shop flyer in a dumpster and was like, this is super interesting. I have all these ideas. What if I just go there and put myself to some of these machines for several hours a day per week? And so now he's involved with several entrepreneurial companies, and it's kind of an outlier story, but we bring this up as a way of saying there's so much opportunity there that we don't even know what's going on. And when we stumbled across the story, we were totally blown away. So it's not to say that this is automatically a solution for some of the problems and challenges that we're seeing going into SOMA, but hopefully there's kind of a beginning of a bridge there, and then there's also a social component that we think could make a lot of difference as well, that hopefully Deborah and I can speak a little bit more to in the next bit.
And so just to wind this down, Margaret referred to 5M Placeworks, and this is really a concept and a set of experiments more than anything else. And as Andy referred to, these projects are really large, they're utterly complex, they're highly political, and things need to change, and there's give and take. Another thing I learned was wind factor. And how much the wind in San Francisco matters, and what you're developing and how much it will contribute to further and more wind, and what that might do to what else you can build is an example of how much give and take there is when you're doing this kind of complex project. The point of 5M Placeworks, and I just did a panel in Los Angeles about placemaking, and for those of you that have been following Art Place and the placemaking conversation and in all of its controversy and glory, there are a lot of conversations around how much should we expect artists to be able to measure impact, and what is the impact that we want artists to measure, and are these economic development projects or are these community development projects? And we kind of got interested in the idea that do we always have to be so this or that? Can we not create a situation where we are actually measuring something over the long term? And this is a very condensed version of a continuum that we drew out, where we looked at the role that community-based and participatory arts activities play over a long period of time in actual jobs for actual people who are often the people who are marginalized from economic development. So the idea here is, and I'll be very simple because my time is up, I'll be really simple about that. The idea is, for example, in our neighborhood, there's a school called Bessie Carmichael. It's a K-8 school. The principal has told me that a percentage that I think I couldn't allow myself to remember the percentage. It was so high, and I have a child who just came out of elementary school. The percentage of children in that school who are either homeless or marginally housed is profound, right? Those children do not have arts in their school program. Many of them are really struggling just to get to school, right? And so if those are the children in the neighborhood, and they're not seeing, or they're not having access to the kind of activity that's growing around them, and they're not using words like entrepreneur, right? Then how will they be ready to step into training programs or mentorship or internships that ultimately result in the jobs, right? And when you're working with Forest City, you can create program that starts there and then touches people over the course of their life. And you can also work with Yahoo, for example, to bake in internship programs and mentorship programs for the people who are living and struggling and working in that neighborhood. So this is kind of a very simplified example of or articulation of what we mean by Placeworks. What's the model? What's the system? What's the structure that creates an integrated continuum of programs and services that involve artists and arts organizations in the system that makes up the neighborhood every step of the way, that ultimately does show that art bridges, that art inspires, that art creates connections, that art makes possible situations for people that may not be possible today. And I always like to end with this quote because I love it. And this was the inspiration for the very first exhibition that we did, that Intersection did at the 5M Project. Let's talk of a system that transforms all the social organisms into a work of art, in which the entire process of work is included, something in which the principle of production and consumption takes on a form of quality. It's a gigantic project. So that's it. We're ready for your questions. We're ready for you, Elvin. Should we sit now?
We'll go to help Elvin present
Okay.
first, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh. Right. Morning, everyone. My name is Elvin Padilla. I live and work in the Tenderloin, have been for a number of years now. Been working to develop this project, the 950 Center for Art and Education, just out of curiosity, has anyone here, or how many folks here have heard of the project or have some familiarity of it? Oh, wow. Okay, I better have something good to say then. Maybe I'll start off with something that my good friend Deborah Cullinan said about trying to get past why do things have to be either or. So much of the work in the Tenderloin to try to get the project, which I'll explain in a moment, off the ground, get it started, has been first doing the groundwork, foundation work of the narrative. And when I arrived in the neighborhood almost 5 years ago now, the first challenge was to start a conversation about the role of the arts in community development. There was already talk at that time about art groups coming to Mid-Market and the Tenderloin, and that created a significant amount of fear and anxiety. So the first order of business was to host gatherings, and we called it the Tenderloin Advisory Group. And in those gatherings, we would invite affordable housing developers, social service providers, youth groups, and yes, even art groups to come to the Arts Advisory. And what people discovered as they sat around a circle in a room together was that even despite the categorization, whatever group you worked for, if it wasn't a arts organization per se, many of the other organizations like homeless advocacy services groups and affordable housing and others were providing art programs. And the youth groups were providing art programs. And then once we got in the room and just sort of had a look at each other, with some of the new people that were interested in joining the community and were interested in partnering and collaborating with some of the old groups, we recognized, actually, in fact, art is not something that necessarily has to be feared because we're in fact all doing it. And it belongs to everyone. So, I just wanted to point that out, that I appreciate what Deborah said in that regard. Since we started this project, another new narrative has been introduced, and is tech. So in the beginning when I came, it was fear no art. Art is not the enemy. Now is fear no tech. So it kind of the same equation with different players and more complicating factors, of course. But the end goal is very much the same: is to try to facilitate discourse and to address fears and anxieties and perceptions that people have. So let me just get right to it in terms of what you're looking at. The site, and this all came about very simply. The project really is such a fight to keep it simple, really, especially now that all hell has broken loose on Mid-Market. But the concept essentially was, after listening to many of the organizations in the Tenderloin and elsewhere, and discovering that a primary source of their chronic instability and chronic need for interventions by funders had to do with the issue of facility stability. And by the way, the Brower Center largely has functioned as a model on which the 950 project is based, insofar as building a multi-tenant, permanently affordable space for nonprofits, using financing methods that are proven techniques in real estate development. So, you have the social mission, which is of course wonderful, but you're going to have to translate that into the real world realities and opportunities, resources, and constraints of real estate development. And that's another part of the bridging of discourses and worlds that we've been trying to facilitate in the Tenderloin, largely via this project, so that artists and art groups, education groups, social services, and others start to become comfortable with basic concepts and understandings of how real estate development works. How did this Brower Center happen? How was it financed? How does it work from an operational perspective? What we're trying to do essentially at the 950 project is have a Brower Center for Arts and Education, a multi-tenant facility that will house, by and large, the huddled masses of art and education groups in San Francisco. Not all of them, because we're looking at maybe about 75,000 feet. And we discovered, and this has been a bit of a heartbreaking journey, but we discovered in the process of actually making progress to building this thing, and without doing any RFPs, requests for proposals, soliciting art groups that may be interested in being housed here, there's an enormous demand. I'm sure that's no surprise to you all, among groups, particularly now with the raging crazy market, real estate market, for affordable space. So again, the simple thing is, let's take out the biggest variable. There are any number of other reasons that may come into play insofar as why art and education groups struggle. But a primary one, if not the primary one, is facility, always being at risk. We're going to take that out of the picture by building this thing. Another reason, again, very simply, if you look at the red text there, that's where the site is. I'll try to explain to you. We're at the corner of Mason, Turk, and Market. So that, on the 5th and Market Street side, obviously, is the Westfield Mall, and then the Powell Street, BART, Muni Station. And then you just cross the street, heading west, up Market, and the first corner that you encounter is the corner where we are proposing to build a mixed-use development, because in addition to the art component, there will be housing, hotel, and retail. And that's the corner that dominates. You go look this way, it's Turk Street. Straight up is Market Street. So we call it our first block. That's the block where everyone encounters and engages the Tenderloin. Not everyone, but most people. Most of the traffic, pedestrian traffic, comes from, a huge amount comes from the Powell BART Muni Station, obviously. So it's an important corner, important block for us to establish our identity. And we wanted to fight for that identity to be something beyond another kind of generic presence and a generic statement insofar as an office complex, a shopping complex. We wanted it to be something that said, we value art, culture, education. So, and around it are amazing assets. Golden Gate Theater, Warfield Theater up the block. ACT bought the Strand. That's going to be a tremendous project. SHN with the Orpheum, not far from there. So the other thing I'll point out is that we have an amazing situation here of colliding worlds and colliding realities. So we have massive wealth. I don't know what the numbers are for the Westfield, but it's one of the most profitable on a per foot basis retail complex in the United States. And of course, Union Square is just a couple of blocks up that way. And then we got Civic Center with the government buildings, Asian Art Museums, a free library. And now we have these guys called Twitter and Zendesk, Spotify, some venture capital firms are moving in. And in the middle of all that, at least from the Tenderloin's perspective, is an incredibly concentrated bubble or community of entrenched severe poverty. So a primary goal, and for me, most important goal, and sometimes I feel a little bad about this because I'm really after the community development power of the arts. I'm after what the arts can do to help elevate the Tenderloin community, what the arts can do to change the norm we have in the Tenderloin. I'm sure all of you, being Bay Area folks, know the images that dominate who we are. And we are about always poverty. We're always about being helpless and needy. We want to change the norm, or at least challenge and question the norm, that we can also be about human development. We could be about community. We could be about life-affirming activities like music and dance and literacy. And that those things belong to us just like they belong to anybody else. So, the question is, of course, yada, yada, yada on the speech making, but how you translate that into real estate development and build something, again, on the order of the Brower Center Fortunately, we're partnered, and I see one of the representatives here, Steve, with a wonderful developer that totally got inspired and digs our project. It's a local woman-owned company called Group I. They got excited about our vision. God help them. And they're going to work with us to try to incorporate the art and education piece. And it's complicated. There's a special use district in the works that will help with the financing. We're going to have to figure out a capital campaign. And the new market tax credits that introduce 20% subsidy, which is one of the main things that undergirded the development of the Broward Center, is going to loom large for to build this center in 950. So I should leave time for questions because I'm sure there are several and many. But that's the challenge. The challenge is to. Oh, one last thing I'll say on the arts. That's kind of an enigma to me, and I always take the pulse of my wise counselors, people like Deborah and Judy Nemzoff and Francis Phillips and Carrie Schulman. And I wonder if we're building something that is archaic. I mean, we're just going to build black box theaters, workshops, and classroom space. We're not going to be turning some kind of the world on its head with some future model that creates the whole new paradigm. We're kind of going old school and building space for art groups to do programming. And I wonder, some folks say that era of people sitting in black boxes for 90 minutes to 2 hours is done. And it's a colossal mistake to go back to building capacity. And we're building like 4 theater spaces here. ACT is building the Strand up the block. A couple of other art entrepreneurs are building 2 more black boxes up Taylor Street. We are kind of reinventing what once was a vibrant arts-based economy in the Tenderloin and mid-market. Will the capacity meet the demand? Will the demand be there to support the capacity? And it's a real delicate question among funders, and no one, in my conversations with funders and everyone, no one seems to quite know the answer. But we're going to just take our best educated guess on good faith in a very transparent way with everyone and hope that this works. Thanks.
Thank you, Deborah, Elvin, and Andy for really stimulating presentations. You raised a lot of excellent questions. I'm going to be very fast because I want to leave room for questions, and I know a lot of people in the audience want to ask those questions. I just want to say, as a historian of urban planning and urban development, I've learned to be really skeptical about development projects. I've interviewed many developers, and one of the things that I admire most about them is how flexible and nimble they have become in designing packages and presenting their projects in ways that really match the ever-changing parameters of the particular location in which they're working. And certainly, I think the 5M project has been incredibly sophisticated in doing that. But at the end of the day, I guess I would say that, in a sense, this is all icing on the cake of a fairly standard large-scale real estate development. We all know that San Francisco is a tough sell for developers, right? The city is always asking questions. They're always trying to get more from the developer. There's an extremely active citizenry that is always pushing for more affordable housing. They're always questioning development. So, but at the same time, at the end of the day, real estate development is a risk-adverse model. It has rules. It's extremely rule-driven. And at the end of the day, in spite of the kind of icing, the project has to make a profit, right? That's what it's all about. And I'm not trying to demonize real estate development. I'm just saying that's how it works. But what I think, and so that's really not of interest here, although I think it needs to be mentioned in passing. What's of interest here is, I think, what are the models for arts development and community arts development? These really don't exist. And I think both of our speakers today pointed out that that's what they're trying to do. And I would really applaud them for trying to create new models with unexpected juxtapositions between unlikely allies or collaborators, real estate developers, who have a very direct model, and arts institutions which are still seeking really successful development models that, as was pointed out, would allow them to have a long-term physical presence in the city, which is something that is very much in danger now. So the questions I would like to ask, though, are really have already been asked by the speakers. How does this actually work in practice? How can these arts institutions leverage this relationship to their own benefit? I mean, I think it's really clear how the collaboration with the arts institutions is going to benefit the 5M project. But how exactly is it going to benefit these organizations in the long term? Where's the money? How is that going to happen? 5M is in phase 0. What's going to happen down the line? Who's going to provide the funding? What are the actual legal relationships going to be between these organizations? So I would really hope that that arts organizations can gain the expertise and the knowledge, as I think was also mentioned, to really start to leverage the situation much more in their own benefit. And use the current situation of, I think, difficult development to find their own homes in the city and establish lasting presence. So basically, that's the question that I'd like to know. And how is that going to happen? That's the unanswered question here. And the answer obviously remains in the future. But I would say that the arts organizations need to be tough and skeptical as they really fight in what is turning out to be, I think, a very, very difficult climate. Okay, questions? And can we have our panelists up here to answer the questions? Do you want me to pick the person, or do you want to pick them? Okay. Questions?
I actually could respond to what you just said.
Okay, sure.
These are the kinds of questions that I get all the time. Like, are you sure you're not being exploited? So we could just go for it a little bit.
Yeah, but I would say you are being exploited, but you want to exploit.
Well, and I think that's the kind of the key to it.
We exploit each other.
We exploit. But I think that's sort of the key to it is like, look, we partner, right? Because we need things from each other. And in the arts, I would argue that we are rather good at partnering with people who share this, that are the same as us, that are like us, that have the same resources and experiences that we have. And that's a different kind of partnership. It doesn't require the sort of complex negotiation that this one requires. And I think that when I look at it, I just think you have to know what it is that you want. And you have to be and need what you want and what you need. And you have to be really careful about the pressure people will apply to you that to want or need something that you don't want or need. Now, an example of that is I can't tell you how many funders have come to me and said, why aren't you an owner in the 5M project? And it's like, what? Why would Intersection for the Arts want to own any or much of a 1.6 million foot mixed use project? What Intersection wants is a home base, and it wants resources, and it wants the ability to integrate artists wholly into the solution. What we want is to be at the table, right? And so I think it's knowing what you want and not being pressured to want what you don't, right? A real estate developer, as Margaret says, needs the bottom line. it's fine with me as long as we know what we need and we're agreeing that we're going to try to achieve that together. And that's what's really happened in this partnership, is being really clear about that all the time. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying there are moments when you're like, hey, what are you doing? But at the end of the day, I think it's knowing what you want.
Donna?
Margaret asked about questions of parity between the arts organizations and the developers. I'm curious about an authentic relationship of parity between all three elements, which includes Deborah, you used the interesting term indigenous, but the people who live in those neighborhoods. Eldon, you didn't describe the organization you represent, but it was nice to hear you say that you sat down with all of those arts organizations or organizations that integrate arts in the Tenderloin already. I think everybody's fear is that when these projects are no longer at phase 0 but at phase 3, the arts organizations are going to represent the new San Francisco that strikes fear into the heart of Guillermo Gomez Peña and many of us. How do you imagine ensuring that the community stakeholders there already, who are usually marginalized, are an ongoing part of what you're doing?
That's a great question, thanks. And very timely one. And I think the answer, as I can best tell, is you really have to fight to keep the groups at the table, the neighborhood at the table. And it's in a very contradictory way or unexpected way. You're going to come, at least I have come under significant pressure from funders. People always point to developers as being conservative and bottom line oriented. You should try to work with some foundations. And when I mentioned huddled masses, I was not kidding. Huddled masses of art and education groups. Go in front of a group of funders and see take their pulse about your lineup of community groups that's going to be housed and or doing programming at the center. So, on the other hand, they have the money and I don't. So it's kind of this curious, sometimes awkward, and sometimes, and there's a dynamic tension there of trying to keep a place at the table, a push for what it essentially is the riskier but more inclusive position, while at the same time having to answer and negotiate and deal with the people who have power and resources and influence. And then the last thing I'll say, I have to be mindful that I'm not going to be funding this thing after it's built. So I have to take into account the perspective of the big money people, whether they're private or the foundations or City Hall. Because otherwise they'll tell me to take a walk, and then everyone loses. I've been told, be careful about not fighting for the perfect or the best at the expense of something good. So I don't know what the answer in the end is going to be. It'll be imperfect, but just got to keep fighting for that.
I would also just add, I think it's the question, and I don't think any of us have the answer, but a couple of things that we might want to be working towards is just stronger policy. I think if we had made policy a couple of decades ago about stabilizing artist housing and stabilizing nonprofit arts organizations along Central Market, we'd be in a different place today. So I think one thing is that we can't underestimate our role as advocates and policymakers, and so that's a big part of it. There's an organization that's coming into being called the Community Art Stabilization Trust, which could be another example of how we might do this, which is to say what are the structures that do real estate development projects for nonprofit arts organizations and also build the capacity of those organizations to actually be in the world of real estate. So I think looking at that, I learned the hard way. I wouldn't recommend it. I think we need structures that allow us, and we don't need every artist and every arts leader to be a real estate developer at all, but we need systems and structures in place. And the last thing, just to echo what Elvin was saying, I think, as the economy was falling apart and intersection was going through this struggle, I think there are a couple of choices that we have to make. And one is, are we going to stand on the sideline and protest the change that is happening? Or are we going to throw ourselves into it and in so doing try to make it better? It isn't to say that we are throwing ourselves into it because we can see the perfect solution, but I am the kind who will throw myself into it and not part of the way. It's not like I'm going to sit over here and I'm going to wait until intersection gets its building, because that isn't going to solve the problem. That isn't going to move the thing forward. What's going to move the thing forward is by sitting at the table and learning everything that I can and asserting the role of artists every step of the way. So I'm all for throwing in, because this is an amazing room full of people, and if we're doing this, we're going to make it better. We may not get to perfect, but we are going to make it better.
Yep. Yeah, you.
Hi, I'm Beth Rubenstein. I'm thinking a lot about our major arts anchor institutions in San Francisco and sort of their lack of being at this table, in a way. That the groups that Elvin's working with in the Tenderloin and Intersection are sort of kind of small but mighty arts institutions that are really grassroots based and with really successful programming. But if you think about the dollars that they get in the city versus sort of our major arts institutions, it's still really minuscule. You guys are looking at it's still really minuscule. And my experience is that for the most part, those anchor institutions have not really been, they haven't been leaders in this conversation, and they could serve more as the intermediaries between sort of like what's really going on the ground and these sort of policy and bigger issues. So I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
It is my hope that that is the reason that the board and staff of Yerba Buena Center for the Arts hired me. I think, is Barrett in the room? Yes, I would say that's board member, Raquel? Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it is very interesting coming out of a conversation that I was in over the weekend with a national organization called HowlRound, a Center for Theater Commons, just about power structure, access, who's where, and what happens when people are shifting around. And we're seeing some movement around leadership in some large institutions across the country that's kind of radical. And one could argue that it's odd for me to be selected to take over Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in some ways. And so I think on the level of, like, what are we all doing together, and how much of the work that we're doing is about building organizations versus how we are building scale and a movement, no matter what position we occupy, no matter what size organization we're in, but together we're trying to build a kind of cohort and a kind of movement that can really make change. We need scale, and you can do that in so many different kinds of ways, right?
Hi, thank you. I found this really interesting, and I'm just curious about to what extent, I'm thinking about 950 maybe in particular, and your wonderful comment about building another black box, which is it's got me thinking. But I'm wondering what participation by disability arts organizations and activists there are. And one thing I know about the Bay Area is however many black boxes we don't have deeply accessible black boxes. We don't have light booths and welding machines and everything else that are, to use the phrase of the moment, baked in access and really deep access. So I'm curious about to what extent those conversations are happening, because it's an amazing opportunity, any place and in this particular place, to be really creative about that, the way the Ed Roberts Center was, say, in Berkeley.
Well, I'm looking forward to us to get to that point where we get to the design of the studio, workshop, and black box and theater spaces. To date, actually, we've only gotten as far as the architect competition for the macro development, which, by the way, I'll give you guys a little inside information. Is going to be a really big story coming out in a week or two in terms of who the master architect is going to be for the entire complex. It's going to rock mid-markets world. But in the arts group, I'm not telling you, Deborah. In the arts group, we're going to have to probably retain our own architect, designer, theater designer, separate and apart from the larger master developer, to get into precisely what you just described, the particularities of how design the space to be as functional for all as possible. And thank you for offering that. I didn't realize that was an issue. Thank you.
Hi. Is this on? Yes. My name's Linda. This was really very interesting and inspiring. And the question that I have has to do with the idea of indigeneity that you brought up, and the neighborhoods that you are working in, and tourism. And I'm just interested in how you're dealing. I mean, is there an antagonistic relationship between the tourism business in San Francisco and what you're trying to do for your communities? And how can you deal with that issue? Because it's obviously a huge one in San Francisco in the business community.
That's a really fascinating question. I think because, as mentioned earlier, we have structures like Grants for the Arts, and the nexus there is the relationship between tourism and the role of arts in attracting tourism. We have a kind of sort of intuitive, sophisticated, sense of how what we do relates to how we're making our city attractive to people. Someone just told me, I'm not going to remember now, but more people visit San Francisco than almost any place in this country. Like more than New York. We have a huge tourism industry. I would argue the same with the tech companies coming in. What we do is, and especially in communities that are not necessarily represented in a tourism conversation, but what we do is so tied to celebrating the diversity of our city and of the Bay Area. And I think the diversity is what attracts tech companies. It's what attracts tourism. It's diverse, it's rich, it's alive, it's authentic. And I think that's what we do. But the flip side of that is, how do you do that while you're working really closely in communities and your work is, and that's a big question for Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, which is known as an international and national presenter, bringing international artists into the city to create dialogue. And then, but the question then becomes, what's the role of YBCA in supporting the local community and in celebrating the art that is made homemade?
Can I just throw out real quick one more point on that question? For the 950 Center, the Tenderloin has a long legacy in terms of hospitality industry and used to have a vibrant arts-based economy. So we're hoping 950 kind of helps rebuild that, restore that, but for a fringe festival kind of demographic. Because I imagine the big houses, I'm really curious what the numbers are, but the Symphony Ballet Opera probably have immense draws in terms of tourism. I know the folks at the Exit Theater on Eddy Street have been producing the Fringe for many years. And it would be nice to cater to that demographic, which is arguably more tech-oriented as well.
Hi, I'm Nathan John, and I have a question, I guess, in Deborah, your use of the word intuitive in talking about the kind of touristic value of what you're doing sort of keyed it off for me, and it's for all three of you, but it's a question of how you discuss the valuation of what's being done, because I think that historically a lot of the discussion about the valuation of arts happens along kind of with foundations or funders, and with artists happens around a kind of intuitive sense. And my instinct is that within Forest City, it's probably being described in a much different set of terms that have much more to do with that kind of bottom line that we're all accepting. And so I wonder if Deborah, when you're talking about what you're after is a seat at the table, how are you describing your economic valuation in a way that gives you control over that conversation, or are you doing it, or is it just Forest City's numbers that kind of are they uncontested, I guess, Forest City's economic numbers that are leading them to put in these tenants?
Well, Andy can add into that, but I think if I'm understanding your question, it's a little bit about a couple of things. It's a little bit about the way in which we articulate our intrinsic value and the way in which we articulate our instrumental value. And again, I'm much more of a both and person. I'm not an either or. I really think that the extent to which artists and arts organizations can get really good at embracing that we do both, and that sometimes it is about beauty and intrinsic and intuitive value, and that is in and of itself so immensely valuable. It is our human right. It is what makes our field distinct. And sometimes our instrumental value is what is leading us, our ability to engage in community, to help make change, to educate, to serve, right? And that I think the arts organizations of tomorrow will be those that do both and that know how to articulate both and the connection to each. So it's a little bit of that. I hear a lot of like, is it a community organization or is it a cutting edge arts organization? And it's like, well, why the hell can't it be both? And shouldn't it be both, right? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is the beautiful thing about the relationship with Forest City and Intersection is that Forest City doesn't tell Intersection what to, it's not, there's not that kind of an exchange, it's a collaboration. It's about saying, we've been out on the street, on the 6th Street corridor, and we've been talking with the folks at United Playas and at Bindlestiff and at City Crossroads and Sisters Rise, and we're hearing these challenges, these issues, and we're hearing an interest in utilizing art to address these challenges and issues, to tell these stories, to create advocacy. How do we work together? How do these beautiful, weird collection of resources all together help us to do something that we might not otherwise be able to do on our own? And I think that's the, from in a spreadsheet kind of format, it's ultimately, for Intersection, it's about how does Forest City help to support the kinds of programs that we want to be doing. And I think for Forest City, it's about how much real estate do we lend to arts use.
Yeah, I think the way that Deborah articulated it was really good. The two parts, one intrinsic and one instrumental. So I think when we articulate this vision of 5M as an arts and entrepreneurial and community place, it sounds very much like an intrinsic thing, like we're building this place that everyone loves and that we love, and that's why we're doing it, because we're good people. And that's not to discount that. I think we are good people. But there is instrumental value here, and we've kind of let the market speak for itself here. And that when we went out, and this was before I joined Forest City, when we went out and we did community outreach and we asked kind of the innovation world what they wanted to see in a project like 5M, and we asked the community what they wanted to see in a project like 5M. The community said they wanted more economic opportunity. That's kind of a no-brainer. But the tech companies said, we don't want to be in the financial district. We don't want Starbucks at the ground floor. We don't want to feel like we're putting on our suits and going up an elevator. So the second that the arts kind of gets co-opted or goes away or becomes less authentic, the project becomes less successful. So we see instrumental value in having a really interesting ground floor. And that's not to say that we've checked the box and have Intersection for the Arts partnered with us, but we have to think constantly and kind of every day and every month going forward, how does this place continue to feel vibrant and continue to feel authentic, both so that it's a place that people can enjoy, but also so that it continues to be a successful project.
I think we have time for one more question. Did you have one?
My question was just...
Oh, here. There we go.
Hi. Someone mentioned the word affordable, so I'm interested in a dollar amount for what affordability is from your perspective. And then also the other is a question/statement. I feel the word community is being used a lot, but it sounds like it's being separated from the quote-unquote indigenous people. And while I think the vision is awesome, like truly how can you redefine the urban when the urban is what makes people want to be there? You know what I mean? So I feel like that needs to be the foundation of the project. And if people don't have access, like you said, the school, they don't even have art, are they in the community? Because they're not, you know what I mean?
I mean, just to take that first, if that's the impression, I know this guy, but and the project, if that's the impression that we're giving, it's definitely the absolute opposite of that. It's all about the notion of integration and the role that art plays in that. I don't think we can't even move forward if that's not how we're moving. But as far as you want like what square foot, a dollar amount? What is it right now, Andy?
I'm not sure, actually.
I mean, what I can tell you is that I know for both of these models and the work that the Community Arts Stabilization Trust is doing, it is about developing financial models that allow for below market rate rent for artists and arts organizations, and that attract organizations like Yahoo, for example, to pay above market because they see the value. And in that paying of the above market, they're enabling for a city's financial model to work in a way that allows for nonprofit arts organizations and others to come in below market. That's at the root of the structure.
And by the way, some of the affordability in this equation is not necessarily paying dollar per square foot. In fact, the Hub, or Impact Hub as it's now called, and Tech Shop are for-profit businesses, but what they do is they lower the barrier to entry for small businesses and for artists. So as an artist, say you don't have to rent out your own office, but you can pay a fairly low monthly fee and get into Tech Shop's resources and start your own business or nonprofit from there.
Okay, thank you very much, panel, for a stimulating series of presentations. And thank you, audience, for great questions.